I want to take this opportunity to thank the members of Westside UU, especially Linda and Myron, for your invitation for this return. It's a joy to be back in this congregation and to hear that there have been so many good things going on in your life. I've enjoyed being with you before. I look forward to hearing about the progress. We celebrate the ministry that Alex has had here and continues to. And we're looking forward to celebrate Sherry Woodbury. Is that right? Is that her name? We look forward to that very much. We've got many reasons to believe that Westside Unitarian Church is a divinity school-related congregation. I really liked it when you said, Myron, that it was our Bright Divinity School. That's how we feel about you. And Bright Divinity School is a Unitarian Universalist-related seminary, too, because of the living links that bind us together. As a matter of fact, just this past term, in May, the Reverend Dr. Daniel Cantor, who's a pastor at First Unitarian Universalist over in Dallas, taught for us. We are so enriched by the Unitarian Universalist students we have at Bright, from First in Dallas, from Waco, the congregation there, from Arlington, and from First Jefferson. So we're just looking for a West Side person. Come join us too. We'd be delighted to have you. Today is like a layer cake, isn't it? I mean, there's so much that's stacked on top of something else. And I really appreciate that participatory lesson in LGBTQI history today, because the history has been made painfully present in this last week, has it not? For a nation who believed that we were further down the road than in fact we are. It is worth rehearsing these things together. Because you see, today we celebrate the run-up to the Stonewall riots, just like you said, Byron. But we also celebrate, besides Father's Day, Juneteenth. On the 19th of June, African Americans here in Texas first heard that there was such a thing as an Emancipation Proclamation. News didn't travel very far or very well in 1863, but it finally got here by June the 19th, and African Americans heard that President Abraham Lincoln had acted to set them free. And so this celebration of freedom is being embraced all across Texas and all across the land. And of course, our hearts have been broken by the continuing horror that unfolds in Orlando, and we think about the religious communities and the families in Orlando that are going through unbelievable volumes of grief as they say farewell to 49 and pray for the healing of 53. Bright Divinity School sends its greetings to you, its richest greetings, and we've got the best calling card you ever saw, because Kim and Barbara are with us today, and I'm so glad that Kim and Barbara are here. Barbara Mink, the Reverend Barbara Mink, is with us. There they are, right here in front. Right in front, that's right. Barbara just waved, you know. See, that's like Queen Elizabeth does it. You know, to give it that little, yeah, right there. That's good. Barbara Mink is an ordained minister in the Community of Christ, and is pastored in that fine denomination. And I'm so thrilled that they're here. The best calling card we could possibly have for Bright as our students, and it is such an honor to have you both here, Kim and Barbara. Now, the ball's in your court. Here in Westside, come see us, y'all. I'd like to read briefly from a book I wish I had written. Sometimes you find a book that is so good, so rich, so full of things that are exciting and new, you wish that you'd found it a long time before. Stand by Me, The Forgotten History of Gay Liberation, was done by Jim Downs. And I'd like to read briefly from it because we're in the midst of another commemoration, whether you knew it or not, this very week too. But like Orlando, it is a much darker commemoration. For on June the 24th, 1973, at that time, the worst and deadliest attack upon gay, lesbian, bisexual, and transgender persons in this country took place in New Orleans, Louisiana, with the immolation in the upstairs lounge. Downs writes, "For the people gathered in the upstairs lounge on June 24, 1973, liberation had not just given them the opportunity to gather in a bar, drink $1 drafts, and dance to Cher's hit song, Half-Breed. It had offered them a chance to radically transform each dimension of their lives, especially their faith. By 7:30 p.m., when the beer bust ended, those who were part of the religious congregation had moved to the middle room. They gathered around the piano and listened to Reverend William Larson, the leader of the congregation, as he said a few words. Then David Gary sat down at the piano. His main gig was at the Marriott Hotel Lounge across the street, but on Sunday nights he led the congregation in song. The room began to sing United We Stand, a song that had been made popular earlier that decade by the British pop group The Brotherhood of Man, with lyrics that evoked the American civil rights movement. The congregation stood side by side and sang, "For united we stand, divided we fall, and if our backs should ever be against the wall, we'll be together. Together, you and I." These words foreshadowed what was about to come. What was about to come was an act of terrible murder and arson, in which a man sprayed lighter fluid on the stairs of the upstairs lounge and set it alight. 32 members of the congregation, the entire ministerial staff as well, were burned to death on that night. This chapter concludes, based on the little we know about the upstairs lounge massacre, those who died defied the stereotypes of gay people in the 70s. The victims were neither constantly on the prowl for sex, nor dancing at all-night discos, nor marching in loud protests down city streets. Some had just moved to the city for love, and others had lived and worked in the French Quarter for most of their adult lives. Some were married, others were veterans of the armed forces. Two were brothers who had come to the service that night with their mother. At 7:45 p.m., after the needle had run off the vinyl record, the beer bust had ended, and the front door had been locked. They stood together as a congregation, rocking back and forth as they sang. They embraced each other, believing in the hope of a revolution that had transformed the bar into a church and a people into a movement. And they died, burned to death. We remember the upstairs lounge. Now we're able to do so in light of the deadliest mass shooting in American history, perpetrated against LGBTQIA people who gathered together to dance to salsa music at a nightclub in Orlando. Sometimes we get clarity, don't we? Sometimes it comes in a flash of revelation with all of its pain. Like right now. I'd like simply to repeat the obvious about how fortunate Westside is to have the skill, talent, and dedication of Yuki. There is no way that Linda and Myron and I could have planned that this would be such a day, nor that the subject which I had chosen ahead of time would be able to illuminate a part of today that may be new to some and certainly will reinforce a sense of pride and dignity in others. So today what I'd like to do with Jeff back there, hi Jeff, thanks for your help, just like Paul earlier, I'd like to present a series of illustrations and slides and talk about spirituality in the lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, queer, questioning, intersex, and abstaining community. This one, for the first slide please, is called Grounded in Love, LGBTQIA Communities and Spirituality, with an emphasis upon the Abrahamic faiths of Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. You see, the Abrahamic faiths, contrary to what you may have heard, were actually the cradles of the gay movement. Next slide, please. Our thesis for this morning is that the human rights movement of the 20th and 21st centuries is vitally intertwined with the Abrahamic faiths since its inception. The themes of antagonism with organized religions is a well-told tale. We don't have to rehearse that this morning. But lesser known, or seldom acknowledged if it is known, is the rich interrelatedness of stories and journeys belonging to both sides of this equation, organized religion in the Abrahamic faith communities and the LGBTQIA community. While granting fully the harms experienced by LGBTQIA people at the hands of religionists, we seek to heal the dichotomy and to show how important LGBTQIA voices are in the continuing struggle for justice. So, to begin with, a question for all of us this morning. What is the earliest known LGBTQIA faith community in the USA, and where did it originate? If you were here for the first service, no cheating. So where was the earliest one? What do you think? What, New York? San Francisco? Next slide, please. Oh no. It was the Eucharistic Catholic Church, founded in 1946 in Atlanta, Georgia. This is sweeter than peach, wasn't it? Right there. They knew sweet tea and how to say y'all. And that was where the first predominantly LGBTQIA community was founded. 46. Now remember, the Stonewall riots took place in 1969. But soon, there were other communities. The Metropolitan Community Church, founded in Los Angeles in 68. Dignity USA, which grew also out of the Roman Catholic Church in 1969. And the Church of the Beloved Disciple in New York City, which is illustrated in the picture in the center there, meeting in Trinity Episcopal Church on Wall Street, where it first met in 1970. Now, to the left, you will see the gentleman in the extraordinary hat. That is John Augustine Hyde, the founder of the Eucharistic Catholic Church. And you will see to the left and below that extraordinary person with the mutton chops. We used to wear them, didn't we? Troy Perry, a former Church of God, that means a Pentecostal minister, who started the Metropolitan Community Churches in his own home in 1968. Dignity USA, which was founded by Patrick Nydorf, soon in 1969. Next slide, please. But Judaism, just like Christianity, has had a long and distinguished LGBTQIA heritage as well. Reform, Reconstructionist, Conservative, and now, believe it or not, even Orthodox Judaism celebrates being queer. Rabbi Deborah Brin, whose picture is black and white to your left, a Reconstructionist rabbi, was the first openly lesbian person to be ordained to the rabbinate, 1985. Soon followed by Rabbi Stacy Offner, right beside her there with the Torah cradled in her arms. A Reconstructionist rabbi as well, who was the first lesbian hired by a mainstream congregation in 1988. Rabbi Stephen Greenberg, just go across the slide there, you'll see him. The first openly gay Orthodox Jewish rabbi, 1999. And then, back to the left, you'll see below the two great women rabbis, Rabbi Reuben Zellman, the first openly transgender Jew admitted to Hebrew Union College in 2003. The Reform movement at Hebrew Union College was the first to admit openly lesbian and gay students in the late 80s, and then full recognition of lesbian and gay people by the Union for Reform Judaism in 1990. Pioneers plowing a new furrow, planting new seeds. Next slide, please. But Islam is not silent either. Muslims in America are developing tolerance and advocacy for LGBTQIA people, establishing progressive institutions, and ordaining queer leaders. This is so important for us to say, especially in the wake of Orlando. Meet Imam Da'i Abdullah, America's first gay imam from Washington, D.C., and beside him, Imam with a small I, Annie Zonneville, the founder and leader of Muslims for Progressive Values in Los Angeles, California. Can you imagine such a thing? Well, expand your mind. Because Islam is in there pitching for justice, just as the other two Abrahamic faiths are. Next slide, please. And Islam has been doing it for a long time. The pro-LGBTQIA activism in the USA began at least as early as 1998, when Faisal Alam, you see pictured here to the left, a queer Muslim of Pakistani descent, established Al-Fatihah, which ran successfully until 2011. Next slide, please, Chair. Now, without denying or minimizing the pain and harm done by extremist members of the Abrahamic faiths, any catalog of those that we want to recite will not exhaust the stories of transformation, spirituality, and justice spawned and sustained in, by, and for the LGBTQIA community. As a matter of fact, these Abrahamic faith communities helped midwife the human rights movement in the United States. President Obama recognized that in his second inaugural address. The next slide, please, Jeff. For the sake of the American people, to what challenge are the LGBTQIA faith communities called to rise, especially in the wake of Orlando? Obama asked America to learn the radical lessons of Seneca Falls, Selma, and Stonewall. He said on the 22nd of January in 2013, "We, the people, declare today that the most evident of truths, that all of us are created equal, is the star that guides us still. Just as it guided our forebears through Seneca Falls and Selma and Stonewall. Just as it guided all those men and women, sung and unsung, who left footprints along the Great Mall. To hear a preacher say that we cannot walk alone. To hear a king proclaim that our individual freedom is inextricably bound to the freedom of every soul on earth." For those unfamiliar with American history, the President went on to say, Seneca Falls, Selma, and Stonewall are touchstones of three of the key progressive movements, women's rights, civil rights, and gay rights, that have transformed America and turned the radical ideas of earlier generations into the common sense of today. Extraordinary that an American president would say such. Next slide, please. There have been antecedents, there have been thinkers, there have been spiritual movements that, begun by these great rights movements in America, helped to encourage LGBTQIA folks. I want to lift up these three liberation movements and three monumental books that shook things up and shook things loose. Now, I'm not arguing that these books stand chronologically at the head of these movements. I am arguing that they stand centrally in the vibrant and ever-growing sense of justice and equality that exists within LGBTQIA community and spirituality to this day. The first of them, a book by Phyllis Tribble, the Hebrew Bible scholar, entitled Texts of Terror, who lifted up the story of women in the Hebrew Bible who had been abused and harmed. She cried out against it, and her feminist critique became the clarion call to lesbians and gay men everywhere to rise up. Or James Cone, the great professor at Union Seminary in New York, who learned from the American civil rights movement among African Americans and wrote Black Theology and Black Power in 1969. When someone says that God is at work in a specific ethnic group, that Jesus is a black Jesus, that God has set people free from slavery just like God set Jewish slaves free from bondage in Egypt, it's just a baby step across for other groups to be able to seize upon that message for themselves and say that God is at work for us too. And then, how about the Latin American liberation movement headed by a small, diminutive native of Peru, Gustavo Gutierrez, who wrote in 1971 La Teología de la Liberación, Liberation Theology, and who lifted up the idea that God has a preferential option for poor people, that all other things being equal, God loves those who need love most. Do you see how close that is? Do you see how it is that LGBTQI people can seize that idea and baptize it and transform it? Look at this next slide and you will see how robust these responses to these movements have been. I don't have time to go through all of these, save to say to you that there have been such powerful growth from the feminist critique of sexual and gender objectification out of the African American civil rights movement and out of the Latin American liberationist empowerment that grew out of liberation theology, bursting on the scene with a rainbow of power that has been about the business of assisting people who have been out to come out of the shadows, to step fully into the light, and to say, we are people of faith just like anyone else is, and we are not ever going back in the shadows again. Next slide, please. Now I want to introduce you briefly, in these closing moments, some of the heralds of LGBTQIA spirituality. This is not a history lesson. These are people who are active today, who have come out. Can you imagine at what price they have come out in mainline groups against some of the teachings of extremists in their own groups, to stand up and say that we are just as faithful as anyone else, and to stand between extremists and their own people? Let's look at the first slide. Bishop V. Gene Robinson, now retired, the first openly LGBTQIA bishop of the World Anglican Communion. Somebody in the back gave me a fist pump. How about this one? That's right. The Bishop of New Hampshire in the Episcopal Church. I love this quote by Bishop Robinson. Let's be clear, we've always had gay bishops. All I'm doing is being honest about it. The next slide, please. Rabbi Denise Egger, the lesbian Reformed rabbi of Congregation Kol Ami in West Hollywood, California, in Los Angeles, and now the dynamic president of the Central Conference of American Rabbis. The next slide, please. Here are two Pathfinder LGBTQIA women in mainstream Protestantism. To the left, Joanne Carlson Brown. Dr. Brown is the first openly gay or lesbian ordained person in the United Methodist Church. You heard about their latest general conference? Here is a prophet among them who stood firm all these years. And beside her, Reverend Jamie Spar, the PCUSA, Presbyterian Church in the USA, who refers to herself as a lesbiterian. She began her public work as a lesbian in 1982 in the Castro in San Francisco. Our next slide reinforces your meeting Imam Da'i Abdullah, who is the Director of Outreach for Muslims for Progressive Values and is Imam of an open and affirming mosque. Get that through your heads. An open and affirming mosque called Light of Reform in Washington, D.C. America's first openly gay imam, who actually has spoken out on Chris Hayes' show on MSNBC just this week. All in. Next slide, please. One of the most estimable of leaders is Bishop Yvette Flunder, the founder and presiding bishop of the Fellowship, which is a worldwide communion of same-gender loving people. The founder and pastor of the City of Refuge United Church of Christ in San Francisco. This is one preaching, singing woman who got her first exposure to the stage by being part of the Edwin Hawkins Singers, singing hits across America like A Bridge Over Troubled Waters and Jesus is Just All Right With Me. You know, Yvette Flunder is a Pentecostal minister out of the Church of God in Christ. Maybe that takes a little while to wrap around your head too. And she's as queer as I am. The next slide, please. Rabbi Stephen Greenberg, whom you've already met, the first openly gay Orthodox rabbi from Boston, Massachusetts, here with his beautiful family, who is featured in Trembling Before G-D. Please get that for this congregation and show it. What courage this person has. Next slide. I met Keith Miller in your congregation just a little bit earlier in the first service from the Evangelical Lutheran Church in America. Now, there is an openly gay bishop of the ELCA, the first one, who comes from a First Nations background too, from the Osage Nation. He is not only openly gay, he's two-spirit, and he is now presiding over the ELCA. Next slide. You've got to buckle your seatbelts for this one. Here is the Reverend Allison Robinson, a Baptist. Yes, honey. Yes, honey. A Baptist, transgender, a graduate of West Point, a Texan, who is a member of Calvary Baptist Church in Washington, D.C. She is one moving and shaking, preaching woman. The next slide. The Reverend Dr. Patrick Chang, Asian American, Chinese American, Episcopal priest and systematic theologian from New York City, the author of some of the most important books beginning to break open our consciousness about queer theology and Asian community. Next, please. Imam Annie Zonavelle, the founder and director of Muslims for for progressive values. This is the legitimate face of Islam, folks. This is what Islam looks like. And she is a champion for human rights, whose name has been found on kill lists all over the Muslim world because of her stand. The next slide, please. Succeeding Troy Perry as moderator of the Metropolitan Community Churches, the Reverend Elder Nancy Wilson, who served on the President's Advisory Council for Faith-Based and Neighborhood Partnerships. Next slide. The Reverend Michael Piazza, who is now at Virginia Highland Church down in Atlanta, Georgia, but was the person in Dallas who built Cathedral of Hope from 200 members to 5,000 and made it the largest LGBTQIA predominant congregation on the face of the earth. Right here in North Texas, honey. Right here. The next slide, please. One of the newest voices among us, the Reverend Asher Colaboy, Assistant University Chaplain at Johns Hopkins University. He's the founder of Unheard Transmasculine People of Color Speak, who is becoming the articulate voice of transgender people of faith. And in conclusion, the last slide, please, Jeff, the Reverend Malcolm Hemsheet, transgender, United Church of Christ, the Minister of Transition at UCC headquarters in Cleveland, Ohio, and the central character of the much-viewed video, Call Me Malcolm, another video I recommend for this congregation. At Bright Divinity School, we are led by Dean Jaretta Marshall, openly lesbian, partnered for many years, now the Dean of Bright. And in my small way, I've tried to break the silence in North Texas as well. Who are LGBTQIA people? They are your brothers and your sisters, but they're also your priests, your rabbis, your imams, and your ministers, your hospital chaplains, and your religion teachers. That's who we are. And we're out of the closet, and we've counted our numbers, and there are millions of them. And we're not going back in the closet, no matter how many times we're cause to fear. God bless you for your patience and your attention this morning.